Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Cathy McCafferty-Smith. Cathy has a diverse background, 25-year in private industry and nonprofit education, healthcare, and manufacturing and banking. Her purpose is serving as a leadership development and organizational change consultant. At the individual leadership development level, she focuses on building influential leaders by identifying strengths, talents, values, motivators, personal leadership styles, and uncovering one's own blind spots. At the organizational level, she co-designs, facilitates talent acquisition programs, employee team engagement programs, and leadership action learning programs to assist in solving real-time organizational problems. Cathy collaboratively co-designed multiple award-winning leadership development action learning succession programs with senior executive leaders. Cathy authored and co-published a national medical journal article on behavioral interviewing systems for organizations in 2017. She anticipates publishing her first book in 2020 to help others find their best fit purpose, the working title of which is Career Map, Discovering Your Unique Purpose. Please join me in welcoming Cathy McCafferty-Smith. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you, Tammy, for the introduction.
So, Cathy, as you know, work from the inside out. It's all about finding work, and discovering ourselves, our best selves through our work. And I know that that's a lot of what you're all about. But take us back to some of your earlier years and how you evolved professionally. What were some of your earlier years like?
Well, I like to start with a mini story about my kindergarten teacher. 5 years old. I'm in a PTA meeting with my mom sitting next to me, and the teacher says to her, I would feel comfortable leaving Cathy in charge of the class if I had to leave the room. I'm 5 years old, but it was a passion to become a teacher. It didn't work out that way. I thought I was going to teach, but I ended up being a trainer of adults, and there's a long story behind that I won't go into. But I've enjoyed being in front of people in a facilitated role as well as one-to-one in a coaching role. So it kind of started in kindergarten.
I love it. So, so did she ever leave you in charge?
I don't remember much about kindergarten, but I never forgot that moment. And
that's funny.
I can say this in my book. It's the first question you should ask yourself. My company's name is Know You, so knowing you is important.
Yeah.
What have other people said about you positively? I think that's a big element. If you hold on to those are validated skills. And in my world of HR, that's a reference check.
Yeah.
So they both work in life and work.
Yeah. So before you were self-employed, I know you did work in a variety of roles in your earlier years, post-college and such. Tell us a little bit about some of those early career steps.
Interestingly enough, the early career was mom, but I decided I was vehement about going back to school. So I started college probably in my late 20s, early 30s and didn't finish my degree. I got 3 degrees by the time I was 39, I think.
Wow.
And then a lot of accidental things that look like accidents happen, but really when I look at them, they're sort of like what you would say in an Olympic race. They're kind of like baton passes.
Uh-huh.
A little coincidental and a little unusual and nothing of what I ever expected.
Well, tell us more.
So when I went to college as an older student, there was a particular chair that had just taken hold of it was called the Human Resource Development, Training and Development Department. And I was in the degree program, and he wrote something in a student newsletter saying, hey, I want to make this program better for students by asking students how to make it better. So I went to that meeting, sat next to the chair, which became, I was on his left side. It's ironic, but he was left-handed. I became, over time, his left-hand person. So, but we had a really cool team that put together some things to create different student services, kept hearing some of the things that we needed. So we put a team together. We had a really not so good leader of that team. She was a graduate assistant from another program. And I sat down next to Bob one day, and, because I'm the advocate, I love to teach. I sat in his office and I'm spitting and sputtering about the unfairness of things going on at the university and the not so good leadership of this person with some diplomacy language. And finally, he looked at me with this glint in his eye, and he kind of winked at me and said, well, you sound pretty passionate about leadership. Would you like to lead this team? And I gulped and swallowed and stumbled off the chair and said, sure. So that was my first foray into it. But the coincidence to that is Bob was exactly the same age as my own father. I didn't have a good father role model. He looked like him. He was born the same year as him, and he was from the South. It was almost like a replacement dad. And he and I spent 20 years of a relationship that he was a mentor to me for a long time. So he was the one that propelled the leadership side of my career.
Wow. He really saw that in you.
And I didn't. I honestly didn't.
Wow. But once he saw that in you, it sounds like you were able to begin to see that within yourself.
Well, it helped because over that course of 4 years of working at the university with him, I had 64 student interns that worked in my office. We were helping other students. We were connecting to alumni. We created a mentoring program. We got paid internships for our students when they went out to work as their last stint in their degree program. So I found out stuff I could do that I never thought I could do. But I understand one thing as a result of that. If you don't partner with other people and other strengths and other personality types, you can never be as successful on your own as you can in a team.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. Most people, almost all, I would say, are not successful in a vacuum. There's usually a lot to be said for when we put at least two heads together. And I think it does help to have another pair of eyes and ears on something that we might see a certain way, they might see it a different way, asking some good open-ended questions, and it gets us thinking on our feet so that we're always creating and moving things forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you did that. You were in that role for about 4 years, it sounds like.
And through 2 degrees, half of my bachelor degree and all of my master's degree. And quite frankly, I was grateful to him because he managed to help me get the graduate assistantship. I replaced that other person that wasn't a good leader, so I had a free master's degree that I never anticipated getting. But because I volunteered to do the work in the student team, the exchange was, if I can't pay you, I can help you to do this.
Wow. And what were all your degrees? And you said you got 3 degrees by your late 30s.
Yeah, I kept changing my mind because I was going to do a lot of different things like most people. I started in interior design. I'm 2 classes still shy of that associate degree, but I ended up switching to business. Had some scholarships for business, so I took that. And then the other half of my bachelor's degree was in human resource training and development, which is where I got.
Right.
Last degree is a master's in counseling. I wanted to specialize in career development counseling, but I also dabbled a little bit with grief and transition because I was real interested in change management at the individual level and the organizational level.
Wow. That's really interesting that so that degree was in grief, and what else did you say?
Transitions.
Wow.
And if you've ever lost a job, you're really in grief and transition. So
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And, we're recording this interview during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we know that there's a lot of grief in the air and a lot of transition in the air, and a lot of viruses in the air. And people are going through a lot of that with job losses and those kinds of transitions. So that's really interesting that you saw that as a great way to understand how not just individuals go through transitions, but also organizations too.
Absolutely. And sometimes that's a grappling that's even harder sometimes, because when you're an individual, at least you can cope with it and get support.
Yeah.
Organizations are harder. They're bigger, and I call them the big whale to turn.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the second master's was in grief and transitions. Is that right?
Actually, the master's degree in general. The second half of my first degree was the HR side of it.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I got that.
I did the cheater way. This is to all parents. I think my best education foundation was at a community college, and it was very inexpensive. And then I did my last 2 years in a 4-year university, and I did it debt-free.
Wow. That's amazing. No, I mean, it sounds like a very creative way to do it. Also, you were yourself an adult learner. You had all this life experience behind you when you went off to school. I can imagine it was a very different experience for you, being, an older learner, so to speak, in a classroom where I'm guessing some of your peers did not have the level of life experience that you did.
A fascinating thing, and it's probably because I'm a counselor, if I can address that, is I used to teach in that degree program too. And I enjoyed it because of the mixture because there was a lot of women that were going back to school at the time I was there. I don't know. I think that some of the car factories were letting people go on education leaves rather than, lay them off. And there's some other kinds of things that were going on. But one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I think it's because of my master's degree in counseling, I put 18-year-olds and 36-year-olds together, give or take, if you have those kinds of ranges. And I found something really interesting. I saw that the young ones would encourage the older students, you can do this, you're not too old, all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And the 36-year-olds were going, well, here's some pitfalls to watch for so you don't make the mistakes that I did. And they coached each other in the groups that I had. So generational differences have never been a problem for me because I act more like a millennial than a baby boomer that I am, because I like variety and I got to change a lot of things. And so every experience that I've had, I've picked up something from both generations.
Wow. That is really insightful and informative. Most of us would really benefit from taking a page out of your book on that. So going forward from there, you had all these degrees, you had done some teaching at the university, and you decided to move on from there.
Well, I decided to move on, but a couple of things happened before I decided to move on that made me move on, if I can. We ended up with a really challenging situation. We had a senior leader that a whistleblower law was evoked on. And that meant that we went through a lot of newspaper public stuff. And then we ended up losing that leader because he went to jail. And I worked in HR at the time with an attorney that was a labor attorney, which was exciting. She's still a dear one to me, but she went through a lot, and so did I, because we were holding down the fort. And a new superintendent came in, and because she was new and because we were kind of raw, I went out and reached up and went to her, asked her about what her perspective was with HR. And I was doing some assessment work with leaders, and I wanted to see if she would bless what I was doing or if she had a different, offering she wanted. We had a conversation in her office. Prior to that, I had sent her some previous emails about keeping her informed because rumors were going everywhere. Because when you have a lawsuit and you're in the newspaper and everything else is going on, a lot of false things happened. So I would keep her informed, and she would always thank me. So in that face-to-face meeting, I will never forget, they used to call her the Dragon Lady. She was kind of tough, but I think she had a big heart because she was a special ed educator before she was the superintendent CEO level. And she said to me as we walked out the door, she said, you're really good at telling me what I do well, because I try to encourage leaders on what they're doing right so they keep doing right. She said, but would you be willing to do the opposite and tell me what I'm not doing so well? And I said, absolutely. I said, I'd be diplomatic, but I will tell you straight up. And she goes, you don't have to be diplomatic. You can be direct. That's my style. And throughout the 3 or 4 years that I was in the organization after that, I would do the same things. I would give her hints, or I would help her, or I would talk about cost savings that I'd heard about. And she used to acknowledge that as leadership. I was her leadership coach from the podium when she would do our all staff meetings.
Wow.
And so I was really surprised because I didn't think she would see me that way. Fast forward a couple of years, we got to 2008 and 2009, and we had a lot of funding cut from education.
Right.
And so 80 people were told 8 months in advance, we're going to have to let you go. And I was one of those 80. So when we were done and we had a joint meeting, I walked up to her afterwards and you don't touch the CEO, but I did. I touched her on her arms and I said, you know what? You've been telling me I'm a leadership coach all this time for these months that I've been, waiting to go and leave to another job. I think I'm going to take your advice. I think I'm going to go be a leadership coach. She said, you'd be a good one.
Wow.
So that's how I launched from education back into business.
Aha. So that was the economic downturn that really changed things for you.
Yeah, and what was interesting is I was already in co-creation with some senior leaders who had been laid off. One of them was the CFO of Ford Motor Company. We formed a career transition ministry, and those started cropping up everywhere all over the city. And I ended up being a floating trainer because I was an HR person. I knew how to help people get hired.
Right.
And that built my network like you wouldn't believe.
Wow. And I think one thing that we didn't mention already to our listeners is that you live in the Detroit area.
Yes.
Even though there are several things you said already that someone might surmise that, I just thought we would put that in there. So
and nobody was buying cars at that point.
Right. So the combination of your background in HR and in counseling, it sounds like you had an opportunity with that background, even though you were one of the people laid off, to really springboard into a variety of things from there.
Yes, I did. And another accidental connection was I taught at OU a career coaching class, and one of my students, one of the two that were in HR that took the class, called me up, said, we have 3 people leaving in our organizational development, leadership development department. We could so use you. Will you apply? And I tried to apply, and I couldn't get in because it was a senior level position. They had another level that was lower. So I threw my hat in the ring for the lower level one because they wouldn't let me apply for the senior one. And long story,
is that because you didn't have a PhD?
No, because one was closed and the other one was open. So I shot it at the one that was open rather than the one she asked me to apply for because I couldn't. You know how HR is. When they shut it down, they shut it down.
Yeah.
So, but somebody saw it and they jumped me into the other pot after they finished interviewing all the people that were in the original pot and they couldn't find anybody. So I accidentally got that job too.
So when you say accidentally, I think there's more to it than that. And I think you know that as well. There is something about this. I hear people talk about this a lot when they talk about the various transitions they made from one position to another. And I think there is something here around that when you are the kind of person who keeps your eyes and ears open to what's possible out there, and just kind of literally keeps kind of an open-minded perspective on things, that those kinds of things just show up. And yet I would say that there is a way in which you also happen to be at the right place at the right time. But it does seem like there are certain people who have those things happen to them more than others. And I think that for some people, it's because they stay open and curious. I've heard this over and over again from people who seem to be people who say, I just keep an open mind. I'm always curious. I'm always trying to learn new things. I'm always open to new things. And they describe themselves that way. And I know you describe yourself that way. And
well, I have a more sarcastic way I do it, but I think maybe some humor was good here, because sometimes you get stuck and you don't try things. And I know that's what you're trying to illustrate.
yeah,
I'd say two things: either do it afraid, don't take a risk, do it afraid.
yeah.
Or I will never ever, and I'm an HR person, so keep that in mind, I will never break a rule, but I'll bend them suckers as far as I can.
I'm with you on that. Yeah. And that's okay. That's okay. That's how we make things happen. But yeah, I think, when people are feeling stuck or they've been disappointed more than once, and you and I both know people who have been laid off repetitively from various jobs through no fault of their own, it can wear you down and it can shut you down. And that makes it that much harder to keep that open-minded, curious spirit alive.
And I agree with that to a certain degree, but I'll tell you what I think that helped me at least, and I'm hoping it can help other people. I think taking some action to help someone else alleviate some of that suffering that you're going through, which is what I did at a career transition ministry. And I also volunteered for a group. There's a national organization called Society for Human Resources, SHRM, that had a local Detroit HR support group for people that were in HR that were let go. Because I've been on both sides of the let go desk. I've let go, and I've had to be with that person. And I had a tremendous amount of grief going, because, when I left education, I had to take a pension early to keep it, and I could never go back and work in education. So the door was slammed. It wasn't just shut. I had the good fortune of doing a little bit more consulting, and I even got hired back from my own job as a consultant twice after I was let go. So I've been fired from the same job 3 times. I do really crazy things. So I think that if you don't get out and give, you will consume yourself with grief.
Yes.
The best thing to do is to help someone else, and it's half as heavy of a load when you're helping someone else.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of the networking things that happened for me happen, is because I was in the right place helping the right people at the right time.
Right. Yeah. And so there is a bit of I like to think of things sometimes as a recipe. And if you think about building a recipe around how can you get unstuck, the recipe for unstuck, you just named a number of things that can really not only get you unstuck, but get you moving forward. Taking action to help someone else, get out and give. And then what happens as a result of that is you start getting to know more people, new people, you expand your network. And we know for sure that when you do that, when you expand the range of people you are expanding the chances of you finding your next opportunity. There's no doubt about that.
Well, and the interesting thing to that is it's happened to me so many times, because I've been in so many different industries, not just letting go, but moves, or I had to leave on my own, fired myself from one job because I just didn't think the manager and I fit. I've had 8 jobs created for me that no one ever did before me. They've watched, I volunteered, or I've served on a board, or I've been on a committee, or I've done these career transition kinds of things. None of that ever was the paycheck. Those were always volunteer type of things. But when you're using your skill in front of somebody and you're doing it for nothing, People know that it's in you and they trust it, and they approach me and say, hey, we need this done. Will you come here? And I've written about 4 of my own job descriptions. I think if you're open to what you're saying and you're helping someone else and you're not focused totally on yourself, and you don't necessarily have to get paid for doing it, so the world is open to you. Yeah. You can do anything you want, volunteer. Right. I used to teach a class in the healthcare system that I did, and we did, some of the hiring things. And I would ask them about things they did when they were young people, and are they still doing them? And they say yes. And I'm like, and think of the energy of that. Use that energy to hire the people you want, because if they have energy, you're probably not going to have to motivate them. They already want to do it, whether you pay them or not. Yeah. So those are the ones you want, and those are the ones in HR we want you to hire, because they won't ever end up in our employee relations office because they're happy doing what they're doing. Right. Absolutely. So true. So tell us a little bit about some of the other industries you've worked in, and just curious. I know that in your intro we talked about healthcare, manufacturing, banking. When did those industries come up in your life? After I left education, my student who called me and said, hey, apply, I did. I ended up in a senior consultant position. Mind you, I've never worked in healthcare in my entire life, in charge of physician leadership development. They were doing succession programs, and we had a special one for physicians. And then I created or co-created with senior leaders a intro to leadership for some of our younger doctors so that we could get them on that track too. And it was fascinating in the upper succession level one, because it was nothing I'd ever seen before, but always dreamed of. And let me explain. We used to have 15 to 20, that was the max, and it would last for a 10-month process. It would start in April and finish in like December. And one of the things that was really cool that taught me a lot of how I do my own business now is we did an assessment called Strength Finders. We had a 360 emotional intelligence type of process. It was an interview process. In other words, somebody would have their direct report rate them, a peer rate them, and then a senior leader rate them to give them ideas about their emotional intelligence level. And then we put them in action learning teams by gender, by specialty, and by emotional intelligence and strengths, so that we had mixed teams that would be exposed to each other. And during that 10-month process, they were in a team working on a real problem in the organization that needed to be fixed. Wow. We also had a finance component, so they knew that, opportunity cost, if you spend it over here, you can't spend it over there, so we have to spread this over the whole system. So we taught them system thinking as well. And then they had to present to senior leaders and some of their own bosses at the end of the year during their graduation on their solutions and how they worked as a team and that kind of stuff. It was an amazing program. And all of the teachers in the program, except me, were senior executives, and some of them were physicians that taught the class. Our CEO had a philosophy in the organization of leader as teacher. So I also had the good fortune of coaching every one of those executives on how to be a better speaker and interactive facilitator. Wow. So I got to teach some high-level people, and it was fun because I never worked in healthcare, so I didn't know what I shouldn't do. Right. Well, as they say, ignorance is bliss. But I'll tell you something I learned from that, because one of the senior leaders, he was the chief medical officer. I had the senior vice president of the whole system. Those were my 2 partners. And he had 3 teenage boys at home. And earlier in their lives, he was not as available as he should have been as a father. And he got a really hard lesson at home about being more attentive to his kids. And so he changed his lifestyle to accommodate them. And he used to have, how could you not have 3 teenage boys and not have a story every time I see you, right? Right. So I would hit him and I would talk to him. First thing I would say is, what's the latest 3 teenage boy story? And he would tell me, and he was a wonderful speaker, an eloquent person. He just was amazing. He was from Lebanon, so he was from another country. My other physician was from China. So I had some international but bonding with him through just personal stories equalized the playing field with the senior execs. And sitting at the table with the white coat leaders gave me coattail credibility with all the other young physicians.
Wow.
So, some strategy that I probably inadvertently did, but it worked. So,
yeah. What a great reflection, too, to share with our listeners, that you found different ways to kind of level the playing field as you worked with these people who were, working at high levels in an organization, and, just trying to find a way to connect with them and then be able to teach them some of the skills that they needed to learn. And in a healthcare environment, that's a very important set of skills that especially a lot of medical folks, doctors, they don't get taught any of that in medical school.
They don't.
And a lot of them, those who end up in those more management roles aren't really equipped for it. And some of them have to learn the hard way. So that sounds like a great role that you were in, great opportunity.
And one story that comes to mind when you're saying that, there's an additional person that wasn't part of the physician leadership that created this. He was one of the speakers in our elementary kind of version of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget this as long as I live. It warms my heart. He wasn't the best speaker. He would talk at people and not with them. And so these are some of the simple things you can do if you can remember that a senior leader is still a human being. That was what I always approached it from that perspective, even if I was terrified of their level, right? And so this particular one, I actually put together, because we used to take a picture of everyone that joined the organization. So there was a file you could get a person's picture. So I made a little class picture of all the people that year, like you would get in school with the teachers and, the kids and all that kind of stuff. And I put their names and their specialties underneath it so you would recognize them. Yeah. I used to put that on the podium for this one particular, I used it for everybody, but he really liked it. He said, now I can talk to them and I can use their name. I'm like, yeah, you can. And then what I did for a couple of years, it took me a couple of years to really get the swing of this, but I would compliment him on anything he did well when he was facilitating versus presenting. And I remember the last session that he was in before I ended up leaving, because I went to go on my own. He said to the audience in front of me, he said, Kathy's heard this 100 times. I hadn't, but he was over exaggerating.
Uh-huh.
And he said, I get better speaking every single time I do this because she encourages me.
Wow.
And I thought, you know what? I realized in a couple of positions that leaders are very lonely at the top because they can't be themselves.
Right.
They have to be on all the time.
Right.
And so when you can get, and I should tell the audience, I'm 5 foot, 110 pounds, not much. But I'm 6'4" on the inside, and
right.
So I think sometimes I wasn't as intimidating because I was kind of tiny, and they just trusted me. So I think if you build that trust with anyone, whether that's the person sitting across from you in an interview process, there's still people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just, I think that we create scenarios in our minds because we've been taught certain things over time, especially about certain professions, right? Like
Absolutely.
Doctors, for example, and we think that we can't talk to them like they're people, but we can. So, and it sounds like that's just how you've carried yourself throughout a lot of these experiences. When you talk about this superintendent that you worked with, you saw right through the exterior to a human being, and you touched that part of her, and she responded to it. Same thing you did with some of these doctors. So how wonderful is that, and so from that position in healthcare, you went out on your own at that point.
Yeah, I kind of am strategic, and this is for the people that are still working and not necessarily looking for work. I always have a side hustle of some sort. I did a craft business for a while because I'm a sewer, quilter, that kind of stuff. when my kids were little. I used to coupon and refund back when that was popular years ago, cash it in and that kind of stuff. So the side hustle came as a result of, this was kind of a give and take thing too. We had a number of people and they were looking at cost cutting in each budget area, and they were going to let someone go. And I stopped the train, so to speak, with one of the leaders, and I said, if you're going to let somebody go, could I make a concession proposal to you? I said, I'll work 4 days a week instead of 5, so you'll cut your budget and they'll be happy. And I already retired I did an early buyout retirement from education. I already have benefits. So you don't have to pay benefits. So that's a pretty good chunk of money.
Yeah.
To save a job, because we need the personnel we have. And so they let me. So I work 4 days a week. Now, I'd like to tell you that 40-hour job went down to 32, but it really stayed exactly the same, and they added more stuff because of my skill.
Yeah.
But it bought me a Friday to start building my own hustle. I did the side hustle, and I started, if I can do all this for all these organizations and they keep even hiring me back after they fire me, I must be doing something right. So I'm going to give it a shot and put out a shingle. And so I slowly built my business over about 2.5 years on Fridays.
That's great. You know, that was one of the best pieces of advice. I got a similar I got a piece of advice that sort of mirrors what you're talking about. When I started my business, I was told to try to find a part-time or part-time-ish type role that you can, depend on. And then during the time that you're not working at that job, that's when you build up your business. And that's exactly what I did. And I did it for several years. I had a job that was about 3 days a week. And on those other 2 days, I started building up my consulting business. And it made all the difference in the world. And even over the years that I've been working as a coach, I've always found a contract here or there that would last about a year, that would give me some kind of steady income, that would still be something of a bit of an anchor, I would say. But I think that's one of the things that really helps people who are thinking about going out on their own or starting something that's more independent in that way.
Well, and you have more control that way, but the network building, and you and I espouse to something called Netgiving. When you're serving other people along the way, people start to notice you. I mean, I told you that I had 8 jobs invented for me. I appreciate it because some people are scared to do something that's never been done. But if you know you have a need and there's a gap that isn't filled and no one knows how it's supposed to work, then anything you do is probably going to be successful if you just lean on your own strengths and talents and what you've already done in the past.
Right.
So things can happen for you within a job, because I ended up getting a consulting job out of doing my healthcare job that I'm still on 6 years later.
Wow.
I haven't worked there for 6 years, but I've got one particular team, the COVID doctors, as a matter of fact. And we're doing hiring differently than any other person in the healthcare system, in the physician realm, hiring fellowship. We're just about to start the project again. We're doing it differently because we used to hire somewhat from a medical score, board, certification, recommendation letter perspective.
Yeah.
Now we're doing it from a behavioral perspective.
Oh.
What we're finding, and I know this already because I'm an HR person, but they're discovering that they do less remediation training. They do less employee relations conferences. They do a lot less of painful things with these new physicians, and they're actually kind of doing a pre-leadership program because the behaviors match what they need in this particular division that's dealing with COVID right now.
Yeah. That's fascinating and not surprising. Not at all. Not surprising at all.
That is what the medical journal was on. We've been doing it over a 6-year period, and we've gotten better teaming with the physicians, as well as better hires from the other side of the table. And so it's a win-win on more than one level. And they wouldn't have approached it. I actually made them go through some interviews with me and with their outgoing residents. And the residents were giving them feedback on how they were not so good at interviewing.
Right.
So,
well, yeah. I mean, it makes me think about when I work with somebody who's getting ready for an interview or talking about general hiring practices. I tell people all the time, everybody, can be a bucket of skills. You can have lots of, medical school graduates who have the best GPA and they might be great technicians, but there's a whole nother side of this person that you're bringing on board, and that is a person. And that's who you have to work with every day. So same thing in lots of other work environments. I tell my clients this all the time. When you go into that interview, don't assume that they're just going to ask you about what you've done. They're trying to figure out who you are and can they work with you. And that you bring with you. That's not what you were educated to do. Who you are is the person you've become, the kind of person that you can interact with and collaborate with and work with. And I think that's what you're getting at here with bringing in the new docs, right?
It's best fit, if you were to coin the phrase. In other words, you fit them, they fit you, and you're already propelling yourself way farther into the relationship because you're in sync.
Right.
And I did a podcast this week for education because I still have a heart in it. And we were talking and they kept saying it's so hard to measure soft skills, et cetera, because they're not hard skills. And I'm going, let me put it to you in COVID terms. Soft skills are not soft skills. They are essential skills.
Right. I love that. I always get a little uncomfortable when people call them soft skills because those are the skills that really make things work. Those are the things that make people feel good about going to work every day. And, when you think about what it takes for people to really enjoy their work day to day, it's usually the relationships that they have at work. It's oftentimes less about what they're doing every day and more about who they're doing it with. And that does come down to those essential skills, as you're saying.
That's why I do so much work in assessments. My Strength Finders helps me to find where their energy is. And then I can teach them that other people have different strengths that have energy. And if you combine them, you got twice as much energy.
Yeah.
Or your emotional intelligence, which may be destroying or helping a relationship. If you can manage your emotions and understand yourself, then you're better suited to understanding somebody else's emotions and maybe approaching them differently because they're different than
you. Right.
It goes back to also you got a different style of how you work. Your personality might be, I want to be closed up in front of a Zoom all day and it doesn't bother me. Me as an extrovert, I go nuts if I'm by myself forever without people contact.
Right. Right.
All of those things factor into what we show up with, how we bring things to the table. But are we respecting somebody that's very different than us? Because that difference sometimes is the link to a good partnership.
Right. Exactly. And so, as a job seeker, some of the people listening to this are job seekers. You go into an interview, you are checking out the people you're interviewing with as much as they're checking you out. And even though you are in a position, maybe feeling somewhat vulnerable because you are anxiously trying to get a job, you still have to find your way into something that's going to feel like a good fit. And that good fit has to do with, are these people I can actually work with? Because the last thing you want to do is get into a job where the relationships aren't working out well, because you'll end up back where you are right now. Not a good thing.
You just hit on something that is it's the main pain point for hirers. And there's one more piece to this. It is, do you know what problems I'm wrestling with in my organization that I need your help to help me solve? so many job seekers I know go in looking like, I want a job.
Right.
And they're asking for the job, but they don't take the interest, kind of the way I illustrated with my physician leaders.
Right.
They don't get to know the company or the person that they're interviewing with. And I mean the role that they're playing.
Right.
They focus on what they want and not what the employer absolutely is looking for and needs.
Right. Absolutely. And that's another thing I coach people on all the time is I say, I almost want to say, park yourself at the door and just go in and figure out who these people are, what their needs are, what are their challenges, and then figure out how can you help them solve their problems, because that's really what they want to hear about. Right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we forget they're people too. They're struggling with a whole lot of things going on, particularly right now.
Right.
So some sensitivity to what the organization is going through in a crisis like this is another component of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Cathy, tell us a little bit more about what your business looks like today, now that you've been on your own for several years now, many, many years. What's kind of the blend of what you do, and how might our listeners be able to learn more about what you do?
Well, it's interesting because I don't do business development. That's the first crazy thing that I wouldn't recommend to everybody, but I'm a faith-based person, so I just give a little bit of prayer to it and say, send me people to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And I get everything from a campus leadership ministry that I don't get paid for, but I enjoy the heck out of graduating, seniors and juniors from college. And we do leadership development with them. But that sparked a whole lot of things. And one of the manufacturing environments that I'm still doing coaching with was a volunteer. He's the president of an organization, and he's volunteering in our international student organization. He came to one of my trainings for the students because he's one of the business leaders. And he asked me to come to his company. So that was a crazy ride. And then another one was that I'm just going to tell you how I got clients, because I'm not really.
No, it's good to hear this. Yeah.
So I was asked by a women's leadership group that I'm a coach for to be a host at 2 separate tables honoring 2 honorable women that day. And I met one of them from the organization I worked in healthcare. Always wanted to meet her, never got a chance. She's a senior leader. She's like high level in this COVID stuff right now as a leader. And the other one worked in manufacturing. And one thing led to another. She was raised by an OD dad who taught her a lot about change management. We hit it off. And so I ended up doing some consulting with her and continue to work with one of her coaches. And so forth and so on. I'm in a lot of speaking engagements. I do some things with a women's leadership group. I'm out there helping people sometimes in career transition ministries or groups like a SHRM group. I just keep getting people. And just the other day, one of the group members from the SHRM group, an HR person, called me from an educational institution and asked me if I would work with one of their chief executive officers. So they come from all walks of life and sort of land in my lap. But I think it's because of all the seeding I do with all the giving and all the volunteering kinds of things and the visibility that I have on LinkedIn. And there's a combination of a lot of things. The key point is I care about the other person first.
Right.
And I think that translates into I can trust you. And I think that if more of us would do that, I think building businesses would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
However, that said, my first book written and is edited and proofread by the middle of next month, I have another challenge of how in the heck do you become an author and go on the circuit and tell people about your book? So that'll be my next side hustle I'll have to figure out.
Well, I have a feeling that you will find your way with that too, because you will be able to find your way to letting everyone know about the book, that it's out. And you already have a lot of relationships and connections with people who I bet are just waiting on the edge of their seats to read your book.
I hope so. I mean, I think it was a lot of fun to write. I dreaded it and thought it and didn't do it for a lot of years. But that was another one of those kind of coincidences I didn't mention. I had a woman who knew somebody and I knew somebody, and they happened to intersect. And she was doing a women's blog on career development and didn't have anybody to write for it. And we found out we went to the same church. Her husband was on the Rotary Club that I just presented at, so forth and so on. There's a lot of coincidences in my life. And she asked me if I'd write it. So I wrote 8 articles for her over a course of period of time, and I didn't think anything about it. And then somebody approached me of, why wouldn't you make that a book? I accidentally found her, and she's my 30-year-old author or editor. And so I put it into a book. I'd already written them in an article format. It's not a very long book, but it's enough to do some self-awareness thinking on your own or doing it with a coach so that you can figure out what you're best at, what you're strong at, how to use your talents, and how you've probably already been using them all along the way, and you might not be aware of how good you are so far.
Well, Cathy, I will tell you that once your book comes out, I will revise the show notes on my website so that there will be a link to the book so that people will know where they can purchase the book. And what is the best way people can reach you if they want to learn more about you or want to be in touch with you?
I like to use, I know I'm kind of crazy, and a lot of people like Facebook, but I like LinkedIn a lot. I post a lot on LinkedIn. I'm under Cathy McCafferty-Smith. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, you can spy me out before you ever connect to me, so you don't have to commit if you don't want to. It's kind of safer. But if you'd like to, I'm posting all the time about things of what we've been talking about caring about others and reaching out to others, being leaders with inspiration and not command and control. I do a lot of things with communication. I even put articles and things that I find that are good out there and recommend things. So I think LinkedIn is the easiest way to catch me.
Great. Well, and we will have your LinkedIn URL in the show notes so people will know how they can find you. I want to thank you for being here today and for sharing so many great stories about your journey. I know there's many more stories, but you've shared so much wisdom today, and I really appreciate your open and positive spirit about how you've navigated your career and really reached people and connected with people so beautifully to serve. And I hope people really follow your example because it's a beautiful one.
Well, I will leave you with this quote because I think it's important and it sums up all the things that we've been talking about. You cannot change a mind until you change a heart. And good leaders tell stories because you reach the heart first, then you do the action steps afterwards.
And on that note, I say thank you. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Cathy McCafferty-Smith. It was so interesting to speak with her to learn about her professional journey. What is your takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at www.tammygoulerloeb.com. Just look for episode 095. Are you thinking about what your next professional move is going to be? Perhaps there was a thought or idea that was sparked by listening to today's podcast that you'd like to put into motion in your life. Maybe you're feeling just a little stuck. Get specialized group and individualized support, insights, and accountability from a brilliant mix of professional women in a safe, non-judgmental, creative space. Join one of my small hybrid mastermind coaching groups, starting on a rolling basis. You can learn more at https://bit.ly/navigating career change. If you were inspired by this episode with Cathy, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at www.tammygoolerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. And who knows, maybe you'll be my next interview on this podcast. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.